All right, let's fix all of this. Everybody's more or less in the right place. It's just...
Okay, AuthorGoddess, you and I are switching places real quick.
I mean, I could
run
move
to each
people
other's
around.
houses.
I could move people around. Let's see, that needs to be a bit smaller.
We were just being annoying.
There we go. Come on, over.
Oh, we're getting closed captions.
Yes. Siobhan. Hopefully these nameplates are readable because I spent time making them.
They look lovely.
I have no idea but how visible this is going to be. Oh, I'm going to have to play with that, but I will worry about that last. All right, we've got everybody on. Let's see. I need to be on the top. And then Siobhan, and EG, and then Jasmin. That should be right. Okay. Hey, Tal. Well, should we go back to the other screen, or should we just stay here and chat for a little bit?
I don't know what the other screen is because my computer will fry if I try and watch 2 different live streams at once.
Understandable. Understandable.
One day I will get a big gaming rig that can handle it.
Yeah, the other screen is just the writer's conduit. It's yellow and it doesn't say a whole lot.
At least it says something.
Yeah, it says something. It says Writer's Conduit 2021, and then there's a logo in the corner, and that's about what it has. So I think we should just stick here and chat amongst ourselves.
That's cool.
It's fine with me.
I like your background, Amy.
Oh, thank you.
Yes,
I just happened to see it. It had a fox. I had to have it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I forgot that we could do backgrounds. Let me see if I've got a good one for this panel. That'll work. Assuming that it works. Maybe not.
That's part of the reason why I stopped doing it is my hair is so dark, it blends into the back of my chair.
Yeah.
So I just end up kind of like weirdly cropped. And I do tend to wear black, so then all of this gets cropped. It's like a really weird green screen effect. So I'm just like, no.
Yeah, it was cropping part of my head.
It's a dog!
Oh, it's a baby.
Oh, puppy!
Excuse me. All right.
I don't know if we're supposed to hear Siobhan now, or if they're still talking to someone else.
I think they're still talking to someone else, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
Siobhan is currently running the Building a World Without Racism panel.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure, like, if they were talking to someone, I really just want her dog.
Banshee is so adorable. I love Banshee.
No, go downstairs. It's too hot for you up here.
Zoob the Mad, the transcriber program is Google Meets. I have no idea what it just said, but Zoob
Sorry,
the Mad,
my
close
cat.
enough.
My cat is insisting on being up here, even though it's 42 degrees and she has a fur coat. And I'm like, I don't have a door, so I can't close her out. And I'm like, you can go downstairs where it's significantly cooler. Like, what are you doing? And she's like, I'm going to be beside you. I'm like, there's no need for this right now.
I'm now having flashbacks to that one Pokemon meme. Is this the savannah?
Yeah.
I'm going to text my husband and ask him for ibuprofen. He knew that I would be texting him today, so it's fine.
Oh yeah, I've been texting my aunt all day because I live with my aunt. and being like, so these are the things that I need, because if I leave my room, first of all, I probably am not coming back upstairs, because like even going down one floor, like it drops by 10 degrees. So it's significantly better to be further down. But also it's just like, I'm in the middle of things. So like right now I was like, Auntie, I really need you to go get me some fans. So here's some money. Please go get me something to like move my air.
About 2 hours ago.
Yes.
We'll just go ahead and not play that.
I made it!
Yay!
Yay!
Hey, Siobhan, I see you rated this too.
Yeah, I did. That's why I was like, I'm trying to deal with.
Go on 2 different ways.
All the different things.
Thank you. honey.
It's
I
all
do
good.
apologize if I start yelling at my cat again. I am trying, like, when my aunt gets home, she will go to where my aunt is. But for now, she's like, but I need to be here. And I'm like, you're going to die for a covered thing. It's too hot for you up here.
Oh, she loves you though.
But
She does.
But it's not getting enough cold out.
Alrighty. This is the Writer's Conduit, and we are talking about mythology in fiction today. How is everyone?
Excited.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I'm excited.
All right, so why don't we go through and introduce everyone? We'll just kind of go from one side to the other. So let's start with Jasmin.
Hi, I'm Jasmin. I'm usually Coffee Quill's Hammer Mod 101 Mystic. That's how I got into this thing. I worked in publishing, and I'm an author here, and I'm really into the academic side of mythology, as well as the more fun storytelling side.
Awesome. I am AuthorGoddess, and I am actually pagan, so I study mythology as a matter of course, and I'm pretty sure I've managed to touch on most mythologies throughout the world, which is fantabulous. There's a lot of lovely interconnections and crossovers and things like that that really come into play. And I am the author of the Runespell series, which is based on Norse mythology. So, Siobhan?
Hi, I'm SiobhantheWriter, also known as Brianna. If you ever watch the Toy Soldier Saga, Toy Soldier, RPG. I also am a pagan, but I'm a pagan druid, so mythology is definitely something I research just, and I mean, I love just studying it because it's so fascinating. But I concentrate more on the Celtic mythologies. Doesn't mean I haven't looked at the others.
All right, and Amy/Shy.
I am Amy Winters-Voss, also known as ShyRedFox. I wrote Rise the Elemental Chronicles, based loosely off of Japanese mythology, but I have loved mythology since I was a kid. It's what got me into reading. So I just really enjoy it, and it's been a great excuse to dig deeper into the mythologies of a land that I love and I want to return to. So.
And of course, our host, Eli Quake.
Hello, I'm Eli Quake. I also wrote a book semi-based off of mythology, although my book is Reaper, which is very, very, extremely loosely based off of the mythology behind Grim Reapers. I also loved mythology ever since I was a very small child. My first books were books about the Greek gods, and one Nigerian myth that I cannot remember at all, other than to recall that I read it.
Excellent. So let's just start with what kinds of inspiration we draw from myths. And we'll just kind of do a jump in as you see fit.
All right, so I see fit to jump in, so I'm going to jump in. So I draw there's a book that I'm writing right now. It's called The Meat of Poetry, which is obviously based off of mythology, because that is a myth in Norse mythology. And when I set out to write the story, I decided, well, what would happen if Norse mythology had a run-on collision with Greek mythology? And it just kind of extrapolated from there.
All right. So what I like to take from the mythologies is I like to take the creatures and make them just more interesting, or use them to help tell, like most mythology does, a lesson. It doesn't have to be a lesson that was taught in mythology, but doesn't mean that you can't use it for other life lessons.
I find like mythology and anything that sort of is a person's religion where they build themselves based on their ideas is such an interesting look at who are people and like why do they come up with things, because lots of times if you start really looking at myths, they make a lot of sense if you live in the space and time that these people did. They don't always make sense to nowadays when we have science and, you know, houses that keep each other at different temperatures and this sort of stuff, but they do make sense in the space that they were created for. And so like, I like that people have these stories that they've told themselves about who they are. And I like using that to inspire my own world, either with how I'm building them or using aspects to like flesh out ideas.
I also like to, like Siobhan, I love the creatures especially, and the characters from the mythologies. So I try to, in the world that my book is in, I try to have it where these people believe it, but it's like they've not seen it. The world has to open up for them to be able to see it. And the gateway is through magic. And so I love getting to reintroduce people to something. Oh, that's real. You know, it's just been really fun to explore that with my characters.
Yeah. I personally like the idea of taking mythology and, you know, like Jasmin said, looking at it from where they came from, but then I take it and go, okay, so how would they have grown with humanity over these years? Because most myths are several hundred years old at the very least. So, you know, some of them are thousands of years old. How would the people in those stories have grown and changed as the world has progressed? Because, you know, we kind of, one of the things that I've really thought about is how we tend to look at mythology as almost static. And, you know, the things that we are reading about from thousands of years ago, you know, it's like, okay, so Odin was, you know, a wanderer and, you know, wore a cloak and a staff and, you know, wandered from place to place. Okay, but see, now you have Amtrak. Would Odin still be walking around in a cloak and staff? Or is he going to be like a businessman on Amtrak, just, you know, riding the rails kind of thing? How would they change? How would their personalities adjust to modern life? How would that happen? That's kind of the take that I make with it. So what kind of personal relationship, shall we say, take that however you wish to define it, would you say that you have with the myths that you prefer?
Well, so I don't prefer any myths. Like, I very much sit in the land of agnosticism because I've studied enough that I'm like, if one's real, they're all real, and I'm not making favorites. And if none of them are real, none of them are real. So that's a different problem. But my family is traditionally Jewish. Like, I grew up in a semi-Orthodox religious household, and I don't believe in some of that. And partially, I'm a very opinionated woman. And that doesn't always work so well in Orthodox settings. And while I love my family, this isn't anything beating up on them. It doesn't always lead to the same understanding. But I did grow up in a very this is what we do because this is how we do it. And lots of people are like, well, why would you do that? I'm like, because that's what you do. And then you start researching mythology. They ask the same questions, but they're like, well, why would they do that? It's weird. I'm like, well, you're being very ethnocentric right now, where you know you're normal and everything else is weird, and making assumptions on what their weirdness is. So I end up really enjoying stories and mythologies that kind of explore people on multiple levels and seeing both their differences and their same things. Because we can say that, like, oh, look at these things are similar. I'm like, well, they're similar, but they're also different.
Well, the thing is if you actually look at a lot of the mythologies, almost every single mythology in the world has one thing in common: the Great Flood. It all looks at, but it's all from a different perspective. But they all have the flood. So obviously there was a flood, a great flood in the world at some point. Otherwise, not every culture would have it.
I think it's really interesting. Like, I mean, of things that people have that are similar, it's like everybody uses smoke and fire as a cleansing ritual. Like, that one is super universal, where it's different how they do it. So you will have like the Pope walking with the thing that swings with the incense, or you can have smudging in the First Nations cultures, fire in other ones, where it's like clearly at some point this had a thing. Who knows what it originally was, or if it was just extremely convenient to set things on fire because it's fun. But it has seemed to move with humans to a certain extent, depending on where they went and how they interacted, because we have been interacting longer than a lot of people want us to think we were.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mention coinciding myths, like the flood myth that most cultures do have. When I was in college for the first time, I am an epic failure at college. When I was in college for the first time, I took a class on mythology, and one of the things that I researched was myths to do with Hercules, and I found in an African culture, I don't remember which one, but I remember it's one of the ones up at the top. There is a myth that is super similar to the myth about Hercules and the lion. So similar that they are practically twins.
Well, the thing is, where do you think he found the lion?
Yeah, exactly. Although Greece did have lions.
They did, but so did England at one point too.
That's true.
Man, the world would be so much more interesting if England still had lions.
So, what I kind of take from it being, I've read some Greek mythologies, some Norse mythologies, some different ones. But again, going back to Japan, just because it's so different from my European background, the things that I've loved, that I've kind of latched onto, are like the animism. So everything, including the rocks and the rivers and everything, has spirit, which kind of blew my mind. Mm-hmm. It was just very, very fun. And then they talk about even their words could be alive. This is much, much more of an older thing. I've talked to my friend in Tokyo. He's like, not so much now, but there's an idea that you just don't say anything bad about people, because once you put it into words, it's like alive, and it has options to do things, So it's been very, very fascinating for me to see that side of another culture and go, it's just very, very eye-opening for me.
Yeah. For me, I actually really love to apply science to my mythology. Like for me, it makes perfect sense that fire would be a cleansing ritual around the world, because if you have a disease, what do you do with the bodies? You burn them.
Burn everything.
Yep.
Yeah.
You burn everything because, if you do not have antibiotics, if you do not have that kind of ability to clean things, fire is the way to go. As a matter of course. so applying the science that we now understand to the myths that we created to explain these things that we didn't have the science to understand is absolutely fascinating. For me, my favorite is Norse mythology because I just like it. Okay, I really like it because the gods are total bros. Okay, they are total bros. We're not there. There's some ego there, but it's not like we are gods. It's more like we are drunk, which I absolutely adore. Yeah, and yes, I am familiar with Odin's panty raid.
Oh, don't forget the fact that Loki gave birth to children.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
A couple of interesting ones.
And Thor was gay married. Just saying.
Oh yeah, he was.
But the thing that I really like is the way that the enemy in those mythologies are the Jotun, which are elementals. They are gods isn't even really the right word, but they are the embodiments of fire and ice. Mm-hmm. And a lot of these mythologies that we have today were originated in Iceland, actually. And Iceland is the land of glaciers and volcanoes. So, of course, fire and ice. When you have a culture that is so far north, what do they fear? They fear ice. What do they like? They like family. They like their home. They like their, and that's one of the big overruling things in Norse mythology is your family is everything. You do not screw around with your relationships with other people because they will ostracize you and then you will die because of the blizzards.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Celtic mythologies are very similar with family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you can really see how different mythologies are different around the world in almost direct relation to the kind of climate and environment that they're in. Harsher mythologies tend to happen in harsher environments. They tend to have situations where the gods are less concerned with you. The gods are less likely to help you. The world may or may not be out to get you, kind of thing. And when you're living in a harsh environment, that ends up being how you kind of see the world. You have to look at it that way or else you die.
Oh, I like the question Dragon Magpie just dropped. How do you deal with that much responsibility? Procreate with the power of booze.
Or procrastinate. That works too.
Yeah. So procrastinate.
That one of the things that I found is so if you go to a lot of places that are super desert, they all have a tendency to have either cremations or secondary burials where they first let the nature take the bones clean and then they put the bones away somewhere. Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense when you suddenly realize that if you're in a sandy place, the sand moves, you can't bury anybody. You could put them in the ground and 3 weeks later, they're not in the ground anymore. And there's usually quite a lot of unrested spirits and the Walking Dead and that sort of stuff in these sort of spaces, because if you just leave the body there, someone's going to have a really bad time and come across it because nothing's keeping it down.
Yeah.
And in Japanese mythology, they had to explain volcanoes because at the time that during the era it occurring before, Mount Fuji was constantly turning out smoke and things, and so they had to have ways to explain this, and so they used the story of the gal from the moon, Princess Kaguya, if I remember right, and she was found in a bamboo, and then everybody falls in love with her. She grows up, and including the emperor, and he burns the eternal elixir, and so the fire is constantly coming out of the mountain. And so it's just fascinating to find how they explained some of the phenomena around them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because if you look at the Celtic mythologies, specifically ones from Ireland with the Tuatha De Danann, where they have the Pomori, which have a sort of a relationship with the same as the Ettins from Greek mythology, or the Jotun, the giants from Norse mythology, the Shaitan from the Japanese mythology. Let's see what else. The Wendigo of the Native American mythologies. So it's like all of these mythologies interlink, but in different ways, with different creatures, different beings.
Yeah. Well, and it's also interesting to note that a lot of mythology around how you treat your dead, if you do it badly, results in sickness. Gee, I wonder why that might be.
Yeah.
But then we also do have cultures that, like, this is one that tends to freak people out, but it's always the one that I bring up. There are people in the South Pacific that cannibalized their dead, and it wasn't seen as a like sexy thing. We're going to eat our dead. Like, it was part of mourning, and it's like a really serious thing that when the Jesuits came over and said, you can't eat your dead, it really messed with their heads, because they're like, but then they're going to be cold in the ground and no one's going to care for them. Like, why are you making us do this to our dead? And it's like, to us, we're like, why would you eat your dead? That's terrible. And like, it does cause issues. We are very aware of this now, but it was a huge part. But they are also on a very stony island. You can't ferry a heck of a lot.
Yeah.
Well, not only that, for them, the cultural aspect of it was the fact that they're not eating the dead. They're absorbing the essence.
Yes.
They're making them part of themselves. So they're always with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's and that's something interesting that I would like to kind of delve into a little more. What would you say is the most interesting contextual aspect of mythology you've ever come across? So, like, you know, the background of the culture feeding into the mythology and how it may or may not differ from our own.
So there's a group of people in the Colombian area, and I don't remember their actual name, and I'd probably horribly mispronounce it anyways. But they're one of the very few tribes left that are relatively untouched by modernization. They are very suspicious of anybody who comes into their area, and you have to be invited in, and then you're only invited to a very specific hut. But they have a story that is how they came over the Great Sea and then established their place now in what we know as Colombia and South America. There's a reason why they don't trust outsiders. When people came in and took their blood to do DNA tests without their permission, they linked directly back to the Aboriginal people of Australia, and like a direct link between those two groups. And they clearly came over a sea, and it was interesting to watch a documentary in my mythology classes where this was done with the permission of these people, of how they had to hold onto the story, and they could go through the markers that the people had left from each other and still look on the walls and go, this was a marker that we said that this is a safe place to stop. All the way back to the coast where they would have left the boats from Australia, which is just super interesting.
Well, I mean, that's just it. I'm remembering all the stories from South America, right, with the Olmecs. If you look at the statues of the Olmecs, right, they look like Aboriginal Australians or Africans with that facial structure. I mean, that's the whole thing, is the cultures are all intermingled, even though most people don't accept it. I mean, yes, Icelanders have blonde hair, blue eyes. Do you know why?
Vitamin D.
That's exactly it. Vitamin D and calcium, actually.
Yeah. The calcium is... So vitamin D is interestingly better absorbed with calcium, and Icelanders and other Scandinavian cultures actually tend to have a higher genetic predisposition to lactose tolerance than the average population. Because if you're living in darkness half of the year, you need to replace those vitamins, which means you need pale skin that absorbs all the sun it can get, and you need to be able to maximize that absorption.
Yep.
So we have a question from chat. Do we want to tackle that now or leave it for later?
Let's tackle it now.
Yeah.
AuthorGoddess has a different idea.
How do you bring mythology to life, whether it is an adaptation or your own creation? So this should be interesting because I think that most of us have a wide variation of how we do this.
Well, the way I'd bring it to life is the fact that it all comes down to the culture, the people that follow this mythology. What do they believe? How do they interpret it? How do they react? How does it affect their lives?
Yeah, one of the things that I always try to keep in mind when I'm working with either an existing mythology or creating my own is that gods are characters. They are embodiment of a certain character trait that is important to the culture that it is coming from. So I always try to keep within that character, but also bring it to life. Bring it up to the modern day if I'm working with ancient mythology, or if I'm not working with ancient mythology, if I'm just creating my own, then I try to figure out, okay, what is the culture that I am writing and what is the characteristic that I'm trying to portray with this particular character.
I also am I'm trying to leave as much as I can original, because it is a modern, still modern set of beliefs that I'm incorporating. But I'm leaving where the yokai, the spiritual beings of the Japanese myths and folklore, they've not had to change for thousands of years. And in modern times, as the Japanese people decrease, so they are too, they have to find ways to adapt. And that's where I'm opening up in book 2, where it's like, what do we do now? So that's been a really fun tangent for me.
So I don't tend to use real mythologies in my writing because I'm very aware that a lot of people actually practice these things, and like by accident you can really harm people. So that's not something I touch, because even a lot of religions that people are like, they're extinct, nobody believes them anymore. Like lots of people do. Sometimes they're very much still a practicing culture, and especially with the First Nations of Canada, where they're still in, doing courts being like, no, I'm still a person. Can you please give me back these areas that you said was ours? So that's stuff I don't touch with a hot stick. But when I'm making my own mythology, part of it is, yes, it is part of an everyday culture. And part of it is trying to remember that, like, there's lots of things that we do in the modern world, especially as English speakers, that are very much because we are Christian, Judaic background. So when you go, oh my God, it's not like, most people wouldn't do that because we do it specifically because don't take the Lord's name in vain. And so it's considered a blasphemy, and like, yeah, we do it without thinking anymore, or damn you to hell is the same sort of an idea, where it has very specific meanings within that religion, and because our language is based off of that religion, it's a natural thing for us. And like, no one's sitting there and actually thinking, I am damning you to hell, unless you're maybe very religious, but for the most part, we just say it because it's a colloquial thing. And so if you're writing your own mythologies, that shows up all the time. Is the way you see the world is going to impact how you even talk. It's really hard in English because, once again, it's a very Judaic language, but like, one of the problems we have with translations is there are deities out there that we translate as gods and goddesses, but they're not the way that we would see them. And yet, if you don't know this, you just read it and, oh yeah, that's a god and goddess, but they're either a higher spirit in an animistic form, or there's something completely different that probably should just come over with its own language.
Yes,
Yeah.
With Oni, definitely
Yeah.
with Oni.
Or Kapua for Hawaiian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's Waka the Danan for the Irish and the Celtic.
the Jotun are not actually one of the most interesting things that I've ever done for World Anvil is try to explain the Jotun, because they are completely, well, okay, most of them are humanoid, but they are not human. They, it's like, how does a tree think? That's the same concept. It's not human, and it's interesting to try and explain that, because we are very human centric. Even when we talk about myths and animals and other things, we tend to give them human-like characteristics, human-like thought processes, human-like attitudes towards things, and trying to explain that in a way that a human would understand that isn't human.
Yeah.
It's like, and as we're kind of bringing fringe religions and cultures, especially of places that were really ostracized with colonization, people would be like, oh yeah, those are the gods and goddesses. I'm like, no. Those are clearly not gods and goddesses. Like the Ashara from the Yoruba people are a really good example, because they're not even higher spirits. They're very specific. And trying to explain that in a Judaic Christian-based language with our concepts that come in baked with all of these ideas just fails to represent what this religion is and how they interact with their deities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, if I remember correctly, aren't the Ashara ancestor spirits?
Yeah, they're a little bit closer to that. Like, once again, it's a little bit harder to
but that's what I'm saying.
it.
That's just it, right? It's the translations that come across, and they're just wrong. Because, I mean, the Titans were considered gods, but they weren't. Mm-hmm. Yet they're the creational elements of the world in the Greek mythologies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, and the other big one that I come across a lot is, we use the word gods and goddesses for a lot of these beings. Most of them don't actually expect to be worshipped.
Yeah.
And that is something that is quite a hang up for some people in understanding how this works. Like, explaining the difference between respecting something as being an entity unto itself and that kind of thing versus worship as a deity of this thing. It's kind of two sides of the same coin, and at the same time it's more like two coins glued together.
Yeah.
Like, one of the things is, like, especially, and I keep going back to this because it is a problem in the Christianity world. Like, so in Hinduism, you do have a higher god who was solely created the world, the Brahmin. The Brahmin is not what you worship. They don't care about us. They have nothing to do with us anymore. They put the gods that the Hindus worship in the various forms, and there are many of them on this earth. And then each person kind of has the ones that work for them depending on where you are and what you need and all this sort of stuff. But it's not the same as the Brahmin, who was part of the creation of the planet that we know.
Yeah,
well, it's... Oh, go ahead.
That's the difference between the Brahmin and the Devas.
Yeah.
Well, and it's even more complicated than that, because, for example, the Brahmin is one of a trilogy of beings. But each one of those beings has the male, masculine, these are really bad words for it, but that's what is used, side, and the feminine side, and the masculine side. The best way I've heard it explained, and this was from a Hindu, is the god is the candle, the goddess is the fire. So it's like...
Well, it's like when I did a class that specialized in trying to talk through Indian mythology, which is like, we could be here for 17 hours and not even scratch the surface. Yeah. But one of the things that he talked about is the translation stuff, because we have he and she for the most part. Like, yes, more of us are starting to use they, but that gets complicated because they have deities that are very specifically neither he or she or they are their own sort of thing. And so in Hindu, they have their own pronouns, but then you translate it and they almost always get shoved into he. Occasionally, if they do things like give birth or something else, they will become she, but very rarely. And so if you read them as somebody in the West who has no reason to judge this, of course this has got to be a he. You don't know that there's this entire creature there that is not supposed to have a gender. They don't have those sort of ideas. And you just assume that, yes, it is a he.
Yeah. Or in Japanese mythology where you have Inari, where they sometimes show up as a male, especially when they're helping the swordsmiths, but they might show up as a female. And it just depends on what aspect they choose to show up as, because there's the goddess of rice versus the god of swordsmiths. And so and again, God's very, very loose here because it's the kami, which is hard to describe. I had one other thought too. We were kind of talking about how, like the Christianity coming into an area might change things. I was thinking about how my friend in Tokyo was telling me about how the kappa are now, when you look at the original legends of them, and they were like scary, and they would like eat parts of you that you just don't want to be eating. I'm not going to go into the really details, but it's gross. And they've become a cute character. You see them on all sorts of signs now, and they're just all cutified instead of being these ugly, scary things that could drown you and eat you. So it's become very, very interesting to see the change over the centuries, so especially since like the 1900s. So
the interesting thing is that most of the records that we have for religions have either been oral and then written down by a Judeo-Christian influenced or centered source. So the monks were huge in writing things down, and we don't know how they influenced or changed or adapted or translated these things to fit their Christianized perspective. We don't know. It could be that they made an honest attempt to keep it as it was. It could be that they were, full on trying to Christianize this as much as possible without completely losing the entire plot. We just don't know.
Well, I mean, so sorry, going back to my academic side thing, when I was studying things, one of the first things they did is 95% of the people who were recording this had no interest in the actual culture. They were interested in recording it for cute little tales to send back to England of these primitive people, or they were using them specifically to manipulate and wreck people to be like, see, you already really believe in Christianity. See, you follow this star, which was the Star of Bethlehem. You just didn't know it yet. And when they recorded it, that's all we have, with a few exceptions of these original voices. Now we have been lucky in very few circumstances where some of these have gotten so far that we still have the people and they are still practicing it. So we are starting to get the actual mythology versus this other thing. But in other places, those people have been wiped out entirely in the folkloric sense, even if they still live in a very much in a cultural sense, but their religion and belief has been annihilated. And it has been a tool in the past to record things. Richard Temple is a really bad example of this. He recorded the stories of the Punjab before it was Pakistan and India, and then used those in manipulating and abusing people to get them to follow the English rule.
Speaking of the Judeo-Christians, right? They are really good at manipulating culture. I hate to say it. I mean, Yule became Christmas, which is also Saturnalia.
Yes.
So they went, okay, we're just going to take this, and this, and we're going to shove it into this one spot, and it's ours now.
Well, yeah, and the thing is, we don't even necessarily, in some cases we do know, but we don't even necessarily know, was that holiday as important, or was it just a rando holiday that was around the right time?
And then there's so many holidays that were really important because, once you kind of move away from the, Rome and Jerusalem area where they kind of grow things at specific times, a lot of these holidays were very important to knowing when you can plant things and when you can pick things. And especially when we're looking at the saint days, a lot of those had to move over, because if you didn't, people didn't know when to plant things. And it's not because they were stupid. It's just they marked calendars by this holiday means we're planting things, and this holiday means we're, plucking things, harvesting things. That's the proper word, harvesting, not plucking. And it is a thing where, like, especially if you go over to someplace like China, where they did resist Christianity for a very long time in their own way, those religions lasted for a very long time, where their holidays do mirror the harvest season, which is really important because people need to eat. Most people didn't get to go to the grocery store.
Yeah. Welcome, Raiders.
Yes, welcome, Raiders. Thank you, Telefoundry, for the raid.
As one coming from a Christian background, I totally understand how it can be viewed as manipulative. I also see the side of, we want to help these people and we want to make it as palatable as possible. So it's this hard. I'm so glad I didn't have to be in their shoes for that.
I was raised evangelical Pentecost. So yes, I understand it, right? But I'm also looking at, because I mean, like I said, Yule. Yule was a major celebration for the Norse, the Celts, the Gauls, because that was your midwinter celebration.
You are going through a dark time of year, you're getting depressed, you need a party.
Exactly.
Yes. Everybody needs a party then.
Also got to eat all that stuff that's going to go bad before it goes bad.
Right.
Yes.
I think one of the things, like, I don't think everybody who I come from a Jewish background. I don't think everybody who's in those religions is awful. I do think powerful people will use the tools that are at their hand to be awful. And, like, I'm in Canada. We are living through everybody learning about the residential schools. I grew up knowing about them, but it is, lots of people were not aware of it. And I'm sitting here and be like, how did you miss this?
Yeah.
And it's a reality that, like, okay, a lot of them were run by churches, and there are people who are being like, but how could they? I'm like, I don't think, the priest and the nun who are going to be a good person and, like, want to do good things are going to go to a school in the middle of nowhere with the sole purpose of removing the Indian from the child, which is a terrible thing. And please don't use that on anything. It was what they were using it for. It's a gross thing, but abusive people, no matter where in the world you are, unfortunately in our society, especially in the West, a lot of those powerful people have been Christians and occasionally Jewish people. Does not mean we get to be assholes to other people, but powerful people will use what tools they have. And sometimes that is the belief that they are more correct in a belief than other people.
The other thing too is the fact that, what was I going to say? Something. I got derailed. Sorry.
That's fine.
You love your
another
question?
I've been kind of keeping track of the chat, but I haven't seen any questions.
We just had the one question so far. If anyone would like to ask a question, there is a point redeem for it so that I can keep track of questions asked. But
oh yes, now I remember what I was going to say. The thing is the religion itself isn't the problem. It's the dogma around it.
Yeah.
Yes.
And to be clear, when we speak of religions, most of the time we're talking about the overall historical trend of that religion, not the specific individuals who may or may not be
feel insulted.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things that, like, I try and be careful. Like, I have amazing friends who are Christians, and, like, there's some people I know where I'm like, you are clearly a Christian. There are other people I have met, I don't associate them, where I'm like, you are just using this concept of I am a good person because I'm a Christian to hide the fact that you're an awful bitch. I hope I'm allowed to swear.
You are allowed to swear. I forgot to change my channel.
I just came straight out. But it's definitely, and, like, as we are dealing with the world and where we are, there's a lot of religions out there that are survived Christianity or have evolved around Christianity. Like, there is an entire subset people in Mexico and that sort of stuff that went, sure, we'll be Christian, and then are a very interesting form of Christianity where they basically took their gods and then just kind of, like, overplaced them and say, we're Christians, whatever.
Wait,
I love
you mean Breed all of a sudden became Saint Bridget for random reasons.
Yeah, the funny thing is that Saint Bridget was taken from the Celtic origins, from Brigitte.
Yeah.
Goddess of fire, wasn't she?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes.
I
So,
think it's fascinating.
I find it interesting that Jasmin uses kind of real world mythology to inform their world building for, shall we say, fictional mythology, which sounds almost redundant, but isn't.
But it's important for the stories to have a fictional mythology.
Well, and to a certain degree, anybody who fictionalizes mythology is, in fact, creating their own version of mythology, even if it is more or less, sometimes more, sometimes less, informed by a real world example of that. So my question is, how much research do you do into mythology in order to inform your adaptation or overall rewrites of mythology?
I'll go first on this one, because this is something that I've had to work very, very hard at, because I'm pasty white. I am not Japanese. I barely speak Japanese, even though I've been trying very hard. It's very, very important, though, to try to learn about the culture, talk to people in the culture, to do as much as you can, not just book research, very, very important, but to get involved and care about the culture that you're dealing with. So
if I may, essentially, it is important to understand the cultural context of the mythology.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very good.
And Shy? Domo arigatou gozaimasu.
どういたしまして。
はじめまして。
Sorry, I don't know any.
It's okay. It's
My
just
ex was
us on this
Japanese.
side. Just us on this side.
Yeah. For me, so I have been studying mythology basically since I figured out it was a thing, because I went from wanting to be a paleontologist to realizing that meant bugs, to trying to figure out a way to study history that didn't involve bugs. And just constantly pulling in things and learning. And because my family was very religious, they were like, okay, sure, we can do that. And then I started getting into other religions, and my dad was like, I don't understand, but I support you. And I just started following things down rabbit holes. So my background is a lot more intense than maybe some people. And once I got to college and learned that you can take classes in mythology and folklore, my entire heart was set, and I went there. When I'm creating my world, though, I start with who are the people that I want to represent. And what does that mean? I do have a tendency, I make religions, and then I make people who twist that religion, because I think that's a really important thing, because there are very few religions in this world that do not have extremists. Buddhism has extremists who decide that they're going to harm people. It's not just the ones that we hear about in the news or even on the West. Like, there are people who are like, I believe in this religion, therefore I am the most correct person and you're all wrong. Which sucks when that happens. But I like to explore all sorts of different types. One, I don't believe just in singular gods or goddesses or even polytheistic. I want to create animism. I like to create shamanism, because those have different interpretations on each individual type of people. I do think that in fantasy, secondary fantasy, we focus really hard on gods and goddesses. And I'm like, why not animism? Why not shamanism? Because those ones are weird and really complicated.
Yeah.
They're so fun. And they tend to almost permeate things a lot more, just because by the sheer nature of them, it is so much more involved. And so, like, I have about 4 different religions in a world I'm building right now, and I keep adding, because I also have ideas about how religion should be, that if you create an overall arching religion, it fails to meet the fact that most people live in different areas and have different problems and need to address those.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
And they may not have talked.
Yeah.
It may not have come.
Or if they do talk, it's like, well, that's weird, but works for you. I still have to deal with snowstorms, so you go deal with your little, like, grates.
Interestingly, the actress who played Uhura in Star Trek, Nichelle
Nichols.
Nichelle Nichols, thank you. She wrote a book called Saturn's Child, which was actually pretty decent. and had one of the best quotes that I will always refer to when it comes to world building alien cultures. Essentially, they met an alien culture, and one of the humans expressed shock over the fact that this alien culture had multiple religions. And the alien looked at them and said, "You have multiple religions, why wouldn't we?"
Yeah. The Planet of the Hats, but people just being like, and you all have the one religion. And I'm like, even if you look at like Christianity is not the same. You have all the different forms while claiming to all be underneath Christianity. And for some reason, everybody else is the same. And it's like, it's really weird to me.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, Judaism has its own section.
We really like to homogenize alien cultures.
Yeah, just white it out and just be like, this is all one thing. And I'm like, no, that doesn't make any sense.
No, I mean, that's just it. If you look at the Christian religion in and of itself, there's about 17 different, what's what I'm looking for? Denominations.
Yeah.
Right? And if you look at Islam, there's at least 2, minimum.
There's 3.
Okay. Yeah. I knew of 2.
Yeah, so there's Sufi and Shiite are the ones that most people caught. And then there's one that starts with a D, and I can never remember what it is. And it's mostly practiced on the east side of Africa.
Yeah.
Right.
Dervishes. They're called dervishes.
Right, the dervish.
Yes.
That's right.
Dervishes. Yeah, the spinning guys. There are people in Islam who will tell you they're not Islamic, but they are technically under the same umbrella. But that's complicated.
Well, that is another universal law of religion. If you're not the exact same as me, then you're wrong.
You're not part of my religion.
You're not a real one.
Yes.
So we do have a couple of questions in chat if we're interested in those.
Questions.
Actually, it looks like we have 4.
Did I miss a couple?
There's 2 that didn't have the questions redeemed.
Yes, I did the redeem for those questions, so there's only 2.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. That explains why the problem is. I saw. Okay.
So we have a question from Kata El Zargo or Lazargo, I don't know. Any recommendations on how to meet people of a culture that may be perceived extinct or geographically different? Asking as someone that purposefully has very little social media presence.
So that's going to depend on what your concept of what you're looking for. Quite often they do have form boards. So even if you're not on social media, you can go and read their pages. The Stony Nakota, which is the people that I live in their land. They have their own website where they talk about things and who they are and that sort of stuff. And while they are recognized, their land has shrunk. And so they have been talking about those sort of issues. And it can get you in contact with individuals who may believe in it. Talking to universities can be very helpful if they have mythology, religion, or folklore studies, because they will have contacts that can get you in contact if they want it. There are closed tribes where they will not have anything to do with you. Even if they live in a public life, they don't trust us anymore, and that's fair.
Entirely
if they don't trust us, don't do it. If nobody wants to talk to you about the story, like, I don't care if you think it's your heart story, don't talk about it. Like, it's not your business.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's just it. Like, when I said I was trained by some of the natives, it was actually my next door neighbor. She was an old medicine woman of her tribe, and I was like 8. And she recognized me for what I was and started training me as a medicine woman.
Oh, awesome.
Interesting.
So,
yeah, respecting cultures is the biggest thing. Is if you there are extinct cultures, like there's one in Canada that crossed the Canadian and American border that everybody said was extinct because their land should be over that 49th parallel, and they recently won a court case that says no, these people aren't extinct. They are entitled to their land and to be able to cross the border back and forth because people live on both sides.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And to be fair, there are a lot of ways to learn about culture that don't necessarily include having to talk to the specific people, because there are a lot of reasons that there could be an obstacle for that. One of the things you can do is study the mythology and cultural stories of that culture. However, there's a huge caveat. You should probably, and when I say probably, I mean, if I had my druthers, I would say it would be mandatory that you have understanding of the concept of cultural bias and how your culture may lead to biases, so that you can make a conscious effort to overcome them and take those stories for the cultural context that they are meant to be, rather than trying to approach them from your own cultural perspective. So it's not as easy as I make it sound either.
No,
it's not.
I do think, especially with considered extinct, even though quite often they're not, one of the big things is we have to be respectful, because a lot of people are just like, oh yeah, they're extinct, and do what you want, and nobody cares. And it's like, it's part of the reason why we think they're extinct is because we keep doing this. So don't do that. Like, if you can't contact them, providing that they're not a close tribe, because there are people out there that really want nothing to do with us anymore. Researching and being considerate, and that these are sacred beliefs to people, even if it seems like a silly story to us, they are very important to these other people. And it's really important that you respect that as much as you would respect somebody else's house rules when you go over to their house.
Well, I think a big part of it is that anytime you're talking about mythology, it's not going to be a silly story.
Yeah.
It may be a humorous story, but it's not going to be a silly story.
Yeah.
Because there's always a message in there.
Right. These are the stories of a people and their culture. And as long as you keep that in mind, and I mean really keep that in mind, you should be pretty okay. There is also no guarantee that you're not going to get it wrong. So be aware of that. And if somebody tells you that you're wrong, you need to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
We have several more questions. I don't think we have enough time to get to everyone, unfortunately.
4 minutes.
Let's see here. Okay, that's...
More dog.
Yes, we have a lot of questions. Let's... Okay, here's a good one.
A lot of these are like entire panels unto themselves.
I know,
Yeah,
they
I know.
really are. Let's go with this one. This one's from Dazzlercat. How do you flavor mythology into your writing? Like, how do you make a religious tradition, etc.?
I usually find that if you're going to do that, first figure out what type of culture you're putting it in. Quite often, we are not used to the fact that religion is part of your everyday life if you don't have normal sciences. Like everything. You wake up, you do something, it's religious. It might seem basic, but it's really important to them. In traditional Vedic culture, which is older than Hinduism, you put ghee on the fire in the morning, which helps the fire start burning, but it was considered an offering to Agni. And it's like, it helps the fire get going because it's grease, and grease burns really bad. But it's also like, this is a thing that you do because this is how you start your day. And you have to start your day that way. If you're going to be building a mythology into your world, remember that like it is going to permeate everything this person does in a way that we are a little bit disconnected from in our modern world, where we don't need to be super worried about whether or not we're pissing off some sort of deity that's going to decide to smite us.
Well, and to a large degree, I would actually argue the opposite in a very specific way. There are people who have very specific traditions, and they do these traditions every day. Putting the ghee on the fire, that is an offering to Agni. There was probably some sort of verbal component to that at some point. This was not something that they were like, okay, it's time to make a sacrifice. No, they throw the ghee on the fire in the appropriate way, and they say the words, and they've done their thing. it was so common, it was so baked into their everyday life that the respect came from the fact that they never forgot to do it. The respect came from the fact that there was an ingrained understanding of where it came from. It wasn't like they had to prep themselves for it. That was just, it was how they were.
I mean, usually there were prayers, like to the point that if you read any recipe kind of before the 1700s, regardless of culture, they will tell you which prayer to say how many times for your time period, because it's so ingrained. Like, it doesn't matter if it's Christianity, there's other places in the world that does it too, where it's like, you're going to say this hadith multiple times. And then when you get to the end, that's the time your cream needs to cook or whatever. And like, it is so much a part of their life. Like, I'm pretty sure that they're kind of doing like what we were doing at the beginning of the pandemic with washing our hands, like happy birthday to you. Like, I'm not singing happy birthday to anybody, but it gives you that time space because we knew those words.
Yeah.
Clearly this is a panel that can go on forever, but we are at about time.
Sorry, guys.
Yeah, next year.
That's been fabulous.
Next year, maybe we do mythology for 2 hours.
Well, does it have like a tract of mythology and folklore?
We could do that. Specific ones, like.
And just have people come and go.
Up.
Yeah.
So if there's anything in particular that you want to see next year, go to the Discord and put it in for future panels.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry we couldn't get to everybody's questions. They were wonderful questions. I read all of them and went, yes, we need to. We're running out of time.
Yeah, no. Also, I was like,
and go ahead and join the Discord chat. Most of us will be in and out periodically, and we will try to answer any questions that you have there.
Yep.
Yeah, and if you guys have a question, I'm Jasmin or 101 Mystic. If I can help you, like, I like helping. I clearly like talking. I'm going to run out of this very hot room in a moment, but.
All right.
Yeah, I was about to turn my AC back on because I thought when someone said I was buzzed, it's like, okay, I'll turn my AC off.
Yeah.
And I turn it back on.
Yeah.
So we have 101 Mystic, we have ShyRedFox, we have SiobhantheWriter, spelled in the Celtic fashion.
Yes.
Of course.
AuthorGoddess, and of course Eli Quake. You can find us all on Discord, and I believe are all of us on Twitch too.
Yes.
I don't stream on Twitch, but I'm on Twitch.
Yeah. So you can find us, you can message us, you can get a hold of us, look us up.
Yep. And we will be rating Lady of Zombies for speculative fiction in theater, which is one I really kind of want to see. So I'm going to hit the raid command and hope to see you all later in the con.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye. And OBS is thinking about letting me raid. Hang on, I'm going to open it up on my phone.
The awkward. We raided and now we just sit here.
Oh wait, I got it. All right.
Okay.
All right, and we are raiding now.
Like when you say, okay, bye, and then you walk in the same direction.
Yes. All right, I am stopping the stream.